In honor of Juneteenth, today we're going to talk about some of the most important laws in our country, the amendments. These are the 27 amendments to the United States Constitution. We're going to talk about which of them are the most important, which of them are maybe the least important, and rank them on their importance to our nation, to the Constitution in general. I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but I'm sure I'm going to make half the people that watch this angry, and that's just the way it is. So let me know in the comment section what you think. I will try to explain my reasoning on everything, but this will be a more historically minded video than some of my other more comedic videos. Now, what we are ranking on today is, as I said, their importance to our country, to our republic. So our top spot is for paramount to our republic. So these are amendments that I think our society does not function without. There may be a lot of entries up here because the amendments are very, very important. That they just are. So these ones are just paramount. They're the foundation of, they're the essence of the United States. Below that, I have critically important. These ones are very, very important. I think our nation needs them. However, I do think our nation can and or did survive without them, not suggesting that it should survive any longer without them. This may be some of the later amendments, which introduced very, very important rights, but that were for a long time not there. We'll talk about kind of the differences between there as we put stuff. Very important, good to have. We have kind of a descending importance here. Pretty much everything on good to have or up is things that are going to be good for our country. We do have a spot here for procedural. There are a few amendments that are just kind of procedural things, explaining enumeration, just putting into writing in certain details of some things. I don't want to spoil, but some of you will know which ones I'm talking about. And then finally, we have unnecessary. We'll see if we get to any amendments that we find completely unnecessary. Now, for mine and your reading pleasure, I have the amendments up here on my second screen, so we're going to go ahead and read them all, well, at least the shorter ones. Starting with the First Amendment. Now, the first 10 amendments were collected in the Bill of Rights, which we see here, and this was released right after the Constitution. Anti-Federalists, which made up about half of the country at the time, you could call them states' rights supporters as well. They refused to sign the Constitution without some guarantee of protecting individual and state rights. So what became of that idea, that concept, was the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments, starting with the first one right here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I've read that many times, but I did not do very well that time. Sorry, okay, I lost it for a sec. But First Amendment, I think, is paramount to our republic. That probably isn't a surprise to most people. The First Amendment is usually quoted as being the protecting freedom of speech, which it does do, but as we read, there are actually 5 individual protections that are protected by the First Amendment. So it is not only freedom of speech, but also freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of petition, and freedom of assembly. When you combine assembly and petition together, you get protesting, which is very common in the United States and is in many ways an example of a free society where you are able to air your grievances. However, as we've seen in recent years, sometimes protests turn into other things, but I digress. The First Amendment, I think, is paramount nonetheless to our culture, or to our society as a whole. The concept of respecting somebody's freedom of speech, this is something that our founding fathers lived without while under the British rule. You really weren't allowed to say whatever you wanted, and there was many times in history, especially in Europe, where saying whatever you wanted could get you in a lot of trouble, and that is still the case in many countries today. The United States, you are pretty much allowed to say whatever you want, which leads a lot of people to say stupid things, but it also protects us from tyranny at a very basic and human level. It also protects not all speech, I should say. If you scream fire in a crowded movie theater and somebody gets trampled and killed and there wasn't a fire and you were just doing it for a joke, yeah, probably won't be, that probably won't hold up in court. You will probably still be arrested for that one because, yeah, that's not really freedom of speech. Though some people will probably argue that because there are people who have a very, very strict interpretation. Some of these first couple amendments will definitely be longer than others. Here's one that's going to get me canceled one way or another. The Second Amendment. Now, the Second Amendment, I've thought a lot about where to put this, and please let me explain my reasoning for where I do put it. I'm putting it in paramount to our republic. The Second Amendment, if we scroll down here, the Second Amendment, most people probably do know it, but it is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there is a huge debate going on. This is probably the most controversial amendment. There's a huge debate going on about whether or not all gun rights should be protected, or if it should just be some. As it says, bear arms, to own firearms and whatnot. That was not something that the Founding Fathers were always allowed to do under the British, so it makes sense that this would be one of their first amendments that they created for their new nation outside the British control. And that concept that the people are allowed to keep and own guns, not just guns, but just methods of protection, that the people are able to protect themselves from tyranny of the government or from others. That's a very, very essential, very, very important distinction to make here. It's not just about owning guns because we like to shoot. It's about protecting yourself, protecting the people around you. And I think that concept is very paramount to our republic. It's what makes our country, not just this, but it's an example of what makes our country very individualistic, which has its pros, it has its cons, but the United States has always been a country set aside as that, a very individualistic state. And until that changes, I think the Second Amendment is a very important one, protecting people's rights to defend themselves. Now, we can argue for days about what that looks like. Does that mean handguns? Does that mean assault weapons? Does that mean an Apache helicopter? If I can get my hands on one, can I own one? Probably not, but some would argue yes. So you could argue all days about the logistics of that. However, I think the concept of people have the right to defend themselves, I think that's important. Let's move on to some ones that probably won't be as controversial. Why did I click on that? Okay, here we go. The Third Amendment. No soldier shall in times of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. I'd say this is critically important. It's a very, rarely used, rarely relevant law. However, it is there, and this is something that happened in Boston following the Boston Tea Party and things. The British really cracked down on Boston, and many people in Boston were actually forced to house British soldiers in their houses. There was no place to put the British soldiers, and Britain wanted to crack down on Boston, so they sent more soldiers to Boston, which, as I said, didn't have anywhere to put them. So people were forced to house these soldiers in their house, which is a very tense situation for several years there in Boston. So the Third Amendment protects against that. I'd say that's critically important. It's a very simple thing. Yeah, I think it's important. I'm not going to say it's paramount because I feel like that would be protected one way or another, like under, I don't know, the Second Amendment protecting yourself and whatnot, or maybe I feel like this would not happen in modern society with the media. It would just look so bad if the government tried to do anything like this, even if this law wasn't here. So I'm going to say it's critically important, but it is very, very quick. There's not a whole lot to this amendment. Fourth Amendment's a bit longer. The rights of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. I think that the Fourth Amendment is paramount to our republic, protecting you from unnecessary searches and seizures from the government, police, or otherwise. This is something, it does kind of tie the hands of the police in some cases, in some ways. However, it brings up an important point that you can't just assume somebody did something. You can't just assume that somebody has something in their car. You have to have some kind of probable cause. And that probable cause cannot be how they look. That probable cause cannot be what you think of that person. That probable cause needs to be something, probable, something that can be supported by oath or affirmation that a judge would support. The Fourth Amendment protects us from that. I think it's paramount to our republic. The Fifth Amendment is long. I don't know if I should read this whole thing. No person shall be I'm not going to read the whole thing. The Fifth Amendment, if we read the summary here, it's known as the Double Jeopardy Law. Those tried and acquitted for a crime cannot be tried again for the same crime. Also, the accused cannot be asked to be a witness against themselves. We're putting a lot up here, but I think the Fifth Amendment is very, very critical, paramount to our republic. The Fifth Amendment, taking a look at it, protects you. You know, there's so many times where we feel like a court case didn't go the right way. We feel like we didn't get it right, and hopefully we never feel like that. But when there is cases like that, it wouldn't be fair to retry the person. Or let's say somebody gets off, but the government really wants to hang them with that crime. Poor choice of phrasing there. It really wants to put that crime on them. The Fifth Amendment protects that. You can only be tried once for each crime, which makes court cases exceedingly important because you cannot be retried for the same thing. You can also not be forced to be a witness against yourself. That would be a conflict of interest and pretty much probably incriminate yourself. So that does help protect you as well. The Fifth Amendment's important, kind of a common sense thing, double jeopardy, but I think it's only common sense because we've had it so long in this country. The Sixth Amendment is about the right of all citizens of the United States to a speedy and public trial. This also means an impartial jury and the right to a defense counsel and witnesses. This also infers the concept of innocent until proven guilty. The Sixth Amendment is paramount to our republic. We're sensing a trend here with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, created all together, were some of the most essential freedoms in our country. The Sixth Amendment protects you from your trial being delayed for 20 years. This was something that could happen, especially in Europe under monarchs. The king or queen would arrest you, not really tell you what you did, throw you in jail, and then they would just have you there for 20 years. And they technically wouldn't have broken any law because they are going to have a trial for you, but they just keep putting it off. So it protects against that. It gives you an impartial jury. They're not going to pick people who don't like you or people who are crooked, in theory. No, juries are actually picked fairly well, in my knowledge. I don't know. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. Also secures you to the right to a defense lawyer, witnesses, and that you're innocent until proven guilty. Many of us are guilty of forgetting that last part, innocence until proven guilty. Oftentimes we can see fault in other people prior to that fault being proven. Sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. But I think the Sixth Amendment, for that reason, is paramount to our country. The Seventh Amendment gives the right for any claimant to take a matter to court and trial by jury when the value in question exceeds $20. So the Seventh Amendment allows you to sue, basically. I'm going to say this is critically important. I don't think it's as paramount to our republic because I think that our country goes on without this. I definitely think there's problems. I definitely think there's issues. But if I have to make a distinction here between the most important amendments and the ones that are most, was that less mosts? Yeah, the ones right underneath here, again, 3 and 7, very, very important. But I don't think they are paramount foundational to our republic. But definitely let me know if you think they are. The Eighth Amendment, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. I, again, will put this one in critically important. I think it is a very important amendment. I don't think it's as paramount, and my reason being is I think that if 4, 5, and 6, if these amendments are used with fidelity, 8 would not as much be an issue, because in theory the person has had a fair trial and the person has been proven guilty or innocent, and they have been recommended a sentence that makes sense by the judge or by the jury, judge, however that negotiation works out. Yeah, it's usually the jury says guilty, no, not guilty, and then the judge picks the years. A lot of crimes as well have a distinction that, okay, this crime is going to be 10 to 20 years, or 5 to 25 years. And that causes a lot of issues sometimes because some people, they should be in here life. Well, they can't be because their crime has a maximum of 25 years. And that is the Eighth Amendment at play. So I think it is critically important. I think it is very, very useful, very, very embedded in our society, but I think our society goes on without it. It's just not as good of a society, let me put it like that. I'm finding it difficult to explain the difference between these. I easily could have just combined these and put all of the first 8 amendments up there. The Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So basically this says that the United States citizens have more rights than those currently listed, and their absences don't diminish their importance. So just because something is not in the Constitution does not mean it is not something that people have a right over. Now, this one goes on. I'm going to wait to rank it because it goes on into the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment attempts to separate federal and state law, where federal government only has the powers assigned to it via the U.S. Constitution, and states have power over everything else. I feel like these really go together. I've always considered them kind of part 1 and 2 in my mind here, giving the people and the states more rights. I think 10 is critically important to our society. There are countries, however, that only have a single government and do function. Our country is likely far too large for that to be effective or work well. However, I do think that, is it possible? I guess. So I'm going to put it in critically important. I do think it is very important. This protects the government from overriding just everything that a state tries to do. This also protects against the federal government, to be specific, making laws over things they really shouldn't be involved in. There are matters such as education and health, which are supposed to be state matters, and in the last decade or so, we've seen the federal government encroach more and more upon these rights. Now, COVID was, of course, a extraneous situation there, a national emergency. However, typically we do see education, health, and other things like that being a state right and not a federal right, something that each state should have control over. And the logic being that a state knows its people better than the federal government, and the needs of one state might not match the needs of another state. So I think the 10th Amendment is critically important. But I am going to keep the 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 on their own up there in paramount. The Ninth Amendment, I'm very split on where to put it. Part of me honestly wants to put in unnecessary because it doesn't do anything by itself. It just says, hey, by the way, you have more rights. But that acknowledgement is very important because without it, the government could essentially say, hey, the Constitution, yeah, it doesn't mention, computers at all. So, yeah, we can hack into your computer and watch what you're doing all the time. There is no mention in the Constitution of the right to privacy. Is that example. There's no mention in the Constitution of any modern technology. So there's a lot of laws that get applied to those, but there are stuff that just wasn't foreseen by the Founding Fathers, and I think 9 is very important in protecting against those. I want to put it lower, but I think critically important is, even though it doesn't do much, it's very similar to the Third Amendment, where it's very simple, it doesn't do a lot, but what it does do is important. So I'm going to go ahead and put the Ninth Amendment there in critical, even though it doesn't really do anything by itself. Stating that that is the case, stating that that happens is, I think, really important. Also, this video is going to be long, and if you're actually still watching, I really appreciate it. We're going to probably get into some quicker ones as we get into the non-Bill of Rights. So these 10 amendments, we can see all either paramount or critically important. These are the first 10 that were released together as the Bill of Rights at the tail end of the Constitution. Now, in 1795, the 11th Constitution was released, and this is the notion that the rights for citizens to sue a state only applies to residents in that state. For example, somebody in Texas cannot sue the state of Mexico. This makes sense because if you're suing Texas about a law, you should probably be the one that is affected by that law. This allows people to not get obsessed with outrage over, oh, look what Alabama's doing, and then go ahead and sue them. Even though there are times where states do stupid things, it is up to the people in that state to, complain and or sue the state over that infringement. Also, some of these are not the best in terms of their number. I think this is 11. I think that the 11th Amendment is critically important. It's very simple. It's kind of one that, again, similar to, I'm not sure which one we said this with, it seems like common sense, right? Why would you even assume otherwise? But I believe it is common sense only because it has been around since 1795 for so long. In 1804, we were gifted with the 12th Amendment, and this describes the complex, I'll just read what it says above there. The 12th Amendment is a complex amendment that lays out the laws for how presidents and vice presidents progress through nomination and election process. It goes into who is allowed to vote, qualified electors and delegates, the requirements for becoming president. It was ratified on June 15th, 1804. So this corrected some issues in the first few elections, especially the election of 1800, where there was not very clear rules on what would happen in a lot of cases in the election. It was kind of just was like, okay, we vote for these people. First place gets president, second place gets vice president. And then oftentimes you would end up, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, it only happened twice, but in the election of 1800, you ended up with two people who really didn't see eye to eye, being president and vice president. So the 12th Amendment, I think it is good to have. This is by far our lowest placement yet. The reason I don't think that it is as critically important, obviously having a president is critically important to our nation. Having a fair way of electing the president is critically important. However, I don't think that this specific process that we have with the Electoral College and whatnot is as critically or paramount important to our republic. I definitely think there needs to be, I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting that we should become a dictatorship or even just have a public general election. I think both of those would be mistakes. However, the 12th Amendment specifically discusses how the election of the president and vice president works, and some of this does get further explained and further built on in it's the 25th. I think it's 25th later. So the 12th Amendment I think is good to have, but I hope you understand my reasoning here where I'm saying the 12th Amendment could have been a law. Well, I guess it needed to not be just a law because it would. Maybe it's very important. Maybe it's very important because it does describe how the president is elected, and it stops a lot of funny business from happening. But again, my reasoning is that this amendment could be totally different, and we could have a totally different process where, like, I don't know, all of the South picks a president, and then the West picks a president, and then we choose between those two or something. I don't know. You could have something weird like that, which is still broken up in a way, and it doesn't have to be the exact thing the 12th says. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like I kind of rambled on there, but yeah. 13, 14, and 15. These are some really good amendments, really important. These were all ratified in the 1860s. The 13th Amendment came on December 6, 1865. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The 13th Amendment is paramount to our republic. It is paramount to the concept, the belief that all men are created equal, as our founding documents say. 13th Amendment ending slavery being pretty much one of the most unequal things that you can impose upon a group or individual. So they're having the 13th Amendment, I think, is, well, it's paramount. It protects. Why am I explaining this so badly? This is not a tough one. 13th Amendment and slavery. Please argue with me. I don't think there's an argument for this one, to be honest. The 14th Amendment is also incredibly important. It's long, but it's the assertion of all those that are born or naturalized within the United States are citizens. So if you are born here in this country, you are a citizen. Furthermore, the promise that no state will enforce any law will damage these privileges in any way. There's also the Equal Protection Clause, and that clause of this amendment is probably the most important part of it. Let's read the part. Oh, I can't highlight. Okay, great. So it's the last part of the amendment there. You can see the last 3 lines or so. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The 14th Amendment is the basis of a lot of protections, protecting many, many different groups that were not even around at the time of the writing of this amendment or the Constitution, or that have just been historically treated differently. The 14th Amendment goes into obviously racism, sexism, religious discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, disability. I'm doing this off the top of my head, but it's great. I mean, it's fundamentally important to protect the rights of everybody. And that concept, all men created equal, the 13th and 14th Amendment go a long way to really affirm those beliefs. Let me place that there. The 15th Amendment picks up right where they leave off in 1870. The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is because many southern states, even though former slaves were now citizens, they denied them the right to vote. And they still got around this in many ways for many, many years after this, unfortunately. The 15th Amendment protecting the right to vote is paramount. But the reason I hesitate here is I feel like the 15th Amendment just should have been part of the 14th. The 14th already goes so far in protecting, literally equal protection clause. I feel like one of the equal protection should just be voting, right? But it is important to officially state this, much like the 13th Amendment here. It's important to officially state that, we need to end slavery. So, yeah. Definitely some ones in critically important here that you could have used the same argument with here. But, yeah, 13th, 14th, and 15th, I think, are all paramount to our republic. We have a pretty good record so far, and I guess that makes sense because it's very, very difficult to make an amendment. So the ones that actually get through usually are very important. All right, 16th Amendment. This is one of the lesser known ones. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without appointment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. This is the main way that the United States gets income, is from income taxes. And yeah, that's something that a lot of people are not fans of today. It's always annoying to have your money taken from you before you even see it. It's good to have in terms of like procedural. No, it's not really procedural, I guess. It's good to have in terms of like, yeah, the United States government needs money, but it is something that a lot of people think does infringe on people's rights, and it is something that I don't necessarily should have been or needed to be an amendment per se. Well, again, like the 12th, I guess it did have to be an amendment because it does specifically talk about what Congress can and can't do. I don't know. Excuse me, this is one I've never really considered, to be honest. I mean, it's good to have at the very least. Even if you disagree with it, you can see why. Hopefully everybody understands the argument for having this, even if you don't personally agree with it. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in good to have there, just put one there. However, definitely think it's important, and it might be critically important if we look at the state of our country's financials and stuff today. But looking in a vacuum, maybe just good to have. But again, today, maybe up here, because we have a lot of debt. All right, 17th Amendment lays out the terms for electing senators. This gave power to the people of the United States to choose their representatives and laid out the terms of office. The 17th Amendment was ratified on April 8th, 1913. The 17th Amendment is very important. Much like the 12th, though, I think this is something that our nation does function without, perhaps not as well. I also think that this is something that the 12th and 17th Amendments could have done together. It could have explained the election of all public officials in the United States, not just the president and not just senators. This specifically is senators and not House of Representative members. I will go ahead and put it in very important because it is important to, elect our senators, make sure we're picking the right people, and having that protection that a law can't come along later and infringe upon our rights to vote for our senators. However, the 17th Amendment, much like the 12th, I think is something that should just kind of have been there from the beginning, right? I guess a lot of the amendments are that. It's very important, but that's the highest I'm going to put it. The 18th Amendment. This is the Prohibition Law. This prohibited the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. That's all I need to read. The 18th Amendment is unnecessary. Now, I am not saying drinking in excess is a good thing. However, as many of you already know, the 18th Amendment is going to be repealed. It's repealed in the 20th Amendment. Oh wait, no it's not. The 21st Amendment. The 18th article of amendment to the United States Constitution. I read that wrong. It's hereby repealed. So both of these are unnecessary because without the 18th you don't need the 21st. So even though obviously the 21st is, does something important, it only does that because the 18th made that necessary. So both of these unnecessary. We're back to square one where we started. The banning of all alcohol I don't think is something that works just based on the ingraining of alcohol into American society and just society in the world in general. It is a drug that is really not thought of as a drug by a lot of people, just thought of as a drink or a way to have fun. And there is definitely a lot you can say about drinking in excess and whatnot. I am personally a fan of, rather than banning things, taxing them. I think that's a way of getting more money to the government. Some of you just screamed when I said taxes. But yeah, personally, for all manners of substances, I'm a fan of taxing as opposed to outright banning. So I think that the 18th and 21st Amendment are simply unnecessary. All right, 19th Amendment. I gotta go back. 19th Amendment, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So your gender cannot affect your ability to vote. This is something, I mean, we probably want to put it in paramount. Again, like we've set up here with some of these amendments, the 15th and 19th should have been together. If we scroll back up to the 15th, if we read the actual language here, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So former slaves, anybody on the state of race and color, it does not protect against discrimination based on sex, though. And very particularly, the 19th Amendment says sex. It does not just say women. So this does mean that, you know, I mean, I don't know what situation it would be otherwise, but obviously for many, many years, women were not treated as equally to men in the United States and in many places in the world. So the 19th Amendment protects them in those voting rights. I would like to see, I mean, this is just kind of a revisionist OCD thing, but really the 14th and 15th Amendment should cover the 19th, but the 19th was paramount in finally establishing that voting right for women. So that's good. The 20th Amendment sets the terms for the president and vice president. It says that it ends at noon on the 20th day of January, and that the terms for senators and representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January of the years in which such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and then the terms of their successors shall begin. Now, this is one I would really like to look into. This is our first, I think, entry into a procedural one. You know what? Should we have put 12 and 17 in procedural? They are very procedural for electing senators. And I think 17 is more procedural. I don't know why. Maybe I assessed that. Oh my god, we've been recording for 32 minutes. Why do I do this to myself? Nobody is still watching. Hello out there if you are. Appreciate you. What was I looking for? The 12th Amendment. That's long. That's very long. Lays out how the president and vice presidents progress. Who is allowed to vote. Requirements for becoming president. This one might be more important because there are requirements for becoming president and stuff, and it was so early on, being in 1804. But the 17th Amendment, yeah, I think we can go ahead and say that one's procedural as well. The 20th Amendment, yeah, pretty procedural. Talks about just when presidencies will end. It's important, but you know, it's not really a right that's being protected or anything. We already talked about the 21st Amendment. Moving on now to the 22nd Amendment. It's the notion that no president should be eligible for election into office for more than 2 terms. Furthermore, anyone promoted to president for 2 years or more of a term cannot be elected for more than 1 additional term. So this was proposed in 1947, and this followed Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president from 1933 until 1945. He was elected 4 times. However, he passed away at the beginning of his 4th term, which would have put him in for a total of 16 years, but he ended up living through 12 of them. So this is just protecting us against some kind of dictator getting too powerful, being continuously elected and elected. No matter how popular somebody is, they cannot continuously be elected. Now, our country survived without this for a long, long time, and I would hope that our country does not need this law. I would hope that our country would never elect somebody for more than 2 terms unless that somebody was incredibly popular, great for the country, and really leading our country in many ways. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt did that. FDR led us through the Great Depression and World War II. There are some people that believe he overstepped his presidential ability in creating the New Deal and creating things like Social Security. He did a lot, for sure. However, I don't think anybody would argue that he's not one of the best presidents. I don't know. Actually, somebody argues everything with me, so maybe they would. I had a discussion with somebody, and I guess this is going on a tangent, so we'll just keep going. if the Mount Rushmore was rebuilt today and you wanted to put the 4 best presidents on there, you'd keep Washington, you'd keep Lincoln, you'd probably keep. Well, you'd want to keep Jefferson, you'd want to keep Teddy. They're both great too. But my point being that FDR would be one that you maybe would consider for that. He is up there as one of the best presidents. So him being the only one to serve 4 times, it's a bit of an outlier. Whereas there has never been another case. You talk about some presidents that were very, very popular in their time who weren't able to win that 3rd election or didn't try to because it was just a precedent that that's something you don't do. Now, there have been people who have either tried and failed or expressed interest in repealing the 22nd Amendment. Teddy Roosevelt himself, who was president twice, did run for a 3rd term as a 3rd party. However, he lost. And some supporters of Donald Trump today have said, oh, he should repeal that and keep running. But I'm not sure that anybody seriously believes that, and I'm sure there's somebody who said that about Obama or Biden. In fact, I have heard that about Obama too. So it definitely is something that crosses party lines there. Backtracking, what do we start with? We're on a tangent. 22nd Amendment is very important to protecting our nation, but I would hope that it's not necessary. It probably is, though. So, very important. 23rd Amendment. That's a long one. The 23rd Amendment ensures that Washington, D.C. has electors in the Electoral College, but only as many as the state with the lowest number. This would ensure that voters there had better participation in future elections. I'm not sure how much difference this actually makes in elections. There have probably been some very, very close elections that could have been decided by the difference in Washington, D.C.'s 3 electoral votes. But really, well, it's not really procedural, though. I'm going to say it's good to have. There really is not that many people in Washington, D.C. compared to the rest of the nation. And while it is good that Washington, D.C. is not a member of a state, and therefore it is its own entity, in some ways it would just make sense to have it be its own state and have it, I don't know. It essentially acts like its own state, right? Its own small state. So allowing people to vote there makes sense. It's something that probably should have been allowed, from the beginning. But when Washington, D.C. was created, it wasn't really designed for more people to live there than our elected officials. I don't think. It was in the middle of a swamp. So I'm going to say it's good to have, but like we've said with others, probably something that should have been included before, and also probably something that, our nation does go on without. Not that we would want it to. The 24th Amendment is up next. The 24th Amendment is about the right of any citizen of the United States to vote for candidates in any election for president, Senate, or congressional representatives, even if they have missed a tax payment. This could mean a poll tax payment or any other tax. This amendment was ratified on January 23rd, 1964. This one, I thought this one outlawed poll taxes. What do we have left? No, it doesn't. I guess it doesn't outlaw poll taxes, but it does make it illegal to forbid somebody's ability to vote based on a poll tax, which essentially gets rid of poll taxes as well. This is good because it does protect people from, being unfairly denied the right to vote. Oh, you have to pay $100 to come vote today, right? A lot of people wouldn't. So this does protect against that. However, similar to what we've said with like the 19th Amendment, I think this is something that should have been covered in the 15th. However, you can't blame them for not being able to see over 100 years in the future. I think 24th, similar to what we talked about with 22nd, very important, but perhaps not as critically essential to our country as some of the ones above it. The 25th Amendment, in the case of removal of the president from the office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. This is something that had always been done and assumed, but this just definitely enumerates how exactly that is supposed to happen. It also describes, in the case of the president being in something like a coma, what will happen. Essentially, the vice president takes over as president. And it also, I believe, lays out the terms of succession, of who would become the next president should both the president and vice president be killed. Then it would go to the Speaker of the House. Then it would go to the President pro tempore of the Senate, and so on and so forth. It would go through the cabinet and whatnot. This amendment is important, very, very much so. However, I do think it's definitely a procedural amendment, similar to the 17th and the 20th there. It's something that, while important, it's something that we kind of already assumed or kind of were already doing, and this just kind of explains it or enumerates it. The 26th Amendment lowers the voting age to 18. I think this is good because 18 is old enough to be drafted into the military. So if you are old enough to fight in the military, then you are probably old enough to vote for your president. Now, at 18 years old, I don't know that I was personally mature or responsible enough to make an educated decision about the presidency, and I don't think a lot of 18-year-olds are. However, it is their right, as they are able to serve in the military, to also vote for their leader. So I think this is an important amendment, but, and I don't know if this is a controversial thing to say or not, but I do think it is the least important of the voting amendments. I definitely think protecting on the subject of race, sex, and even, well, I don't know. It's kind of there with Washington, D.C. Which one was D.C.? I always forget the number. It's 23, right? Yeah, so we'll put 26 there with 23. You know, the country goes on if only 21-year-olds and older can vote. But, yeah. All right, finally, we have the 27th Amendment. Now, the 27th Amendment is incredibly interesting. No law varying the compensation for services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. That's confusing. The 27th Amendment submits that any changes to the salary of those in Congress should not take effect until the next election of representatives. Unsurprisingly, given the nature of this bill, it took a long time to reach ratification. So this bill was proposed in 1789 as one of the original amendments as part of the Bill of Rights. However, nobody, well, not nobody, but many of the electors wouldn't have liked this bill because it actually restricts their right to pay themselves or to increase their own pay. And at that time, for many, many years back in history, senators did not make that much money. That would be unheard of today to tell somebody, but yeah, back then that's not how things worked. So the 27th Amendment sat kind of just collecting dust for years and years and years until, as part of, I believe, a high school project, but I could be getting that wrong. A student found this amendment, started a petition to get it back up and running, and actually got it passed. It is the longest amendment from its inception to its ratification. And there are other amendments like this who are kind of sitting collecting dust that will likely never be officially ratified, but could eventually be, but could be. So the 27th Amendment, with all that said, it is just procedural. Sorry for the suspense there. It's not that important. I don't know why we have this picture here. There are only 27th Amendments, and I don't think I missed any of them. 42 minutes. I better not have. Thank you for watching if you actually still are. Here's where I rank the amendments. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Please keep it civil and understand where I'm coming from. I tried to explain my reasoning on all of them, but I know we will not see eye to eye on all of these things, or at least Americans in general won't. So yeah, this has been a very historically minded video, a very lecture-y video, but I did have fun doing it. So if you did watch, thank you for watching. Most of my other videos are more comedic in nature. If you'd like to watch them, there should be some popping up on the screen right about now. Have a great day. I'm going to end this right here. 43 minutes. Have a good one.